Welcome back into the First and 30 football podcast with Dylan and Mel. Today we have a ton of NFL news to get to. We went from free agency being who is going to get Chris Godwin to DK Metcalf request a trade, Joey Bosa released, Davante Adams released, the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl champs are making a ton of moves. We are going to talk about it all on today's podcast. But before we hop into that, if you love the NFL and you're not already subscribed to this channel, hit that button. We are quickly approaching 200 subscribers on the channel. Let's hop in to today's video. So we got a ton of NFL news to get to. The first thing I want to talk about is the DK Metcalf trade request, because I do think that in terms of high-end players that became available yesterday, DK Metcalf could be the biggest game changer for a franchise. Diana Rossini is on the scene reporting that a first and third is desired from Seattle and multiple teams are interested. I'm going to stop that right there. A first and a third for DK in a straight swap. I don't see the likeliness of that happening. I think that that's a fine starting point for Seattle if ultimately they're going to get talked down into a first round pick or a second and a third round pick, and then maybe they send a fourth back. But in comparison, a couple years ago when the Eagles traded for AJ Brown, which I think this is kind of a fair comp, and AJ was probably worth a little bit more, the Eagles sent the Titans a mid first round pick. I think a late first round pick could get you DK, or, maybe if it's another team, that we're going to talk about, like the Patriots, their second round pick, or a middle of the pack team like the Chargers, their second and their third. But we'll talk about draft compensation when we get to these specific teams. But the Seahawks asking for a first and third for DK, I just don't see it happening. 27 years old, entering a contract year. He's never had a season under 900 yards. So DK Metcalf obviously is still a premier wide receiver and a top 20, top 25 guy in football, no doubt. But this isn't a Jamar Chase or even, a Puka Nacua hitting the market. DK probably has 4 really strong prime years left, maybe 3, depending on just kind of how much you think his athleticism holds up at this point in time. But at his age, he still will get a really big contract. So whatever team is trading for DK Metcalf is also in that same vein going to have to pay him north of $30 million per year. That's just kind of where the market is at this point. That's what Brandon Ayuk got last offseason. That's what DK Metcalf's going to get. So you're not only just trading for DK Metcalf, but you're trading for a guy that you then have to pay, $30+ million a year. You do that over 4 years, and you're looking at, committing $120 million to a guy, probably 70 to 80 million of it guaranteed. So I just don't see a first and a third as feasible. I could see a late first or a second and a third as feasible, but you're not getting a first plus additional picks for DK Metcalf. Who are the teams that I think could be in on DK Metcalf? I think an easy one right off the top is the Packers. The Packers were rumored to be kind of sniffing around the wide receiver market like about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and DK Metcalf would be a seamless fit here. The team, I said it once, I'll say it again, desperately needs a wide receiver one. This team doesn't have one. Don't hit me with that in the comment section, Packers fans. Romeo Doubs is nice. Jayden Reed is nice. Those are wide receiver 2 and 3 guys on a really high-powered offense. DK Metcalf could come in and be an alpha wide receiver 1. And not just for the Packers, but DK Metcalf, the size, the strength, the physicality, the speed, it's there. He's not the most pure of route runners, but you need a guy to go win a one-on-one matchup. DK Metcalf can be your guy. And, maybe he could get a little bit better in the route tree department, polish off some of his routes with a new wide receiver coach. I'm not saying it's not possible for him to get better. Again, this guy is in the prime of his career, so certain things could improve. But you pair a DK Metcalf with a Jayden Reed and Josh Jacobs in the backfield, that is a very high-level offense. And in the NFC North right now, with Minnesota proving that, hey, like, we're here to play. The Lions obviously have one of the best rosters in football, in Chicago making a ton of moves to get better. Green Bay is at risk for missing the playoffs. I mean, every team in this NFC North is at risk for missing the playoffs if you don't keep your foot on the gas. At this point in time, the Bears missed the playoffs last year, but they're getting substantially better. It's really tough for 4 teams from one division to make the playoffs, even in a 7-team playoff format, just because they play each other all season. So the Packers have to keep their foot on the gas. Matt LaFleur, in my opinion, top 6 coach in the NFL, Jordan Love, the top 12-ish quarterback in football. Jacobs coming off a really strong year. And again, if you could get those wide receivers slotted where DK's your alpha one on the outside, Romeo Doubs is your two on the opposing side, Jaden Reed is just this amazing slot gadget weapon that you have that, you know, could take any ball to the house. And then you have Tucker Kraft. Like, that is a really, really strong offense. You know, Green Bay always has good offensive lines. The Packers make a ton of sense for me here. They have a mid to late first round pick. And I think that of all the teams that we're going to talk about, they potentially have the best first round pick that can be offered and would potentially be willing to be offered. The second team on my list is the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots are absolutely desperate for a wide receiver. We've kind of known this for years now, but Vrabel coming in, they feel like they have their quarterback of the future in Drake May. They have the most cap space in the NFL, north of $125 million. So not only is wide receiver a position of need, but they can easily afford to pay DK Metcalf and still have a ton of money to spend to improve that defense, boost up the offensive line. You could be active in the draft. You're not going to have to move the number 4 overall pick to get a DK Metcalf. So you could leave this offseason adding a DK Metcalf, adding a Travis Hunter, potentially adding an Abdul Carter. I don't think he's going to fall there, but Travis Hunter potentially, and really going into next year like, hey, we're here to compete with the Buffalo Bills for this AFC East. And the Patriots really could get there. They're one of the teams that I think is potentially very likely to take a massive jump as we head into next season. DK Metcalf would certainly be a part of that. The Chargers are a heavy rumored team. They asked around about DK Metcalf last year. Reports came out and they were told he wasn't available, but now he's requested a trade and now he's available. And the Chargers, after releasing Joey Bosa, which we're going to talk about, they've freed up $25 million in cap space. So now this team has a real ability to go out there and make moves. They have $90 million in cap space. They got a lot of roster to fill, but wide receiver, especially an outside wide receiver, is really part of that. You hit on Ladd McConkey, but he is a pure slot guy. You're probably going to draft a running back in this draft. And if you don't trade for a DK, you're probably going to draft a wide receiver too. Trading for DK Metcalf would fill that hole, but also give you more flexibility in the draft. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Chargers. Getting Justin Herbert, another weapon, it's crucial because not only are you in a division with the Chiefs where you're going to be competing with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid for the foreseeable future, but Denver's not a slouch either, man. This was the 7th seed in the playoffs this year, and they're also in the market for a wide receiver. I don't think that they get DK just because I think him and Courtland Sutton have a little bit more similar skill sets. I'd love to see Denver pursue more of a slot wide receiver option or even a high-end tight end, but DK Metcalf, I think, more so fits what the Chargers need in terms of an outside, big body, big play threat wide receiver. And you remember that playoff game versus Houston. At the end of the day, guys like Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson just weren't getting it done. It was all Ladd McConkey, and that's all you had to go off of. DK Metcalf in playoff games against some of the better defenses in football gives you more of a fighting chance. And a sneaky team that I want to talk about is the team that they played in that playoff game, the Houston Texans. It would take some real working around monetarily, but with Stephon Diggs, a free agent, post ACL, will he come back? Will he not come back? I don't know. And with Tank Dell just having his ACL surgery, probably out all of next year, the Texans are in a position where they do need to go pursue another wide receiver. I don't think it's going to be DK Metcalf, but I also wouldn't be, oh my God, this was out of nowhere if it did happen. Houston could take the route of let's load up on offensive weapons. I think that they do need to prioritize that offensive line, but really it's just the interior. You spend your first 2 draft picks on interior linemen, get them on cheap deals, and you're paying DK Metcalf. It's not a terrible offseason. DK Metcalf and Nico Collins, it'd be one of, if not the best wide receiver duo in football. You know, you'd be talking about it with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. You'd be talking about it with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. I think the production would certainly be there, but I wouldn't rule out the Texans. I'm a lot stronger on Packers, Patriots, Chargers. And if you ask me to put my money on it, I would lean Chargers just because there's a little bit of connection already there from them attempting to pursue him last year, kind of close in proximity, opposite conference, a lot of things that make sense there. But any of those 3 teams scream DK Metcalf to me. Be sure to let me know who you think will be trading for DK Metcalf in the comment section below. Talking about the Los Angeles Chargers, they released 5-time Pro Bowler Joey Bosa last night to free up $25 million in cap space. let's talk about why the Chargers did this. The Chargers have a lot of holes that they need to fill in this roster. They probably need 2 wide receivers. They need a running back. They need 2 edge rushers, realistically, more help on that back end of the defense. And ultimately, they didn't have the money to fill out a complete roster while paying Joey Bosa $25 million a year. And now with $90 million in cap space, I think it's the 3rd most going into free agency, plus a draft. The Chargers have a real ability to fill out a strong roster going into next season. They had a really solid draft last year, developed some younger talent. McConkey, a hit. Joe Alt, a hit. The linebacker that they drafted at Michigan, a hit. Junior Colston. I think that the Chargers are really one solid draft and one solid free agency away from being viewed as true Super Bowl contenders going into next year. The problem with that was they needed the money to do so. And while Joey Bosa, when on the field, is a tremendous talent, he's not on the field consistently enough to be getting paid that kind of money from the Chargers in their mind. And I completely understand where this team is coming from at this point in time. There's just too much holes on the roster to catch up at this point. You saw in the playoff game versus Houston some exposure for the Chargers. The defense wasn't as strong as everybody thought that it was, as CJ Stroud and the Texans offense kind of picked them apart. But realistically, the biggest concern was, the offense, the struggles that everybody predicted that would keep the Chargers out of the playoffs in terms of their offense just not having enough firepower really showed itself in the playoff game. Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers offense all year was ground and pound. Let's, fight through games. But once you started to get to the big stage where you're playing a CJ Stroud, who's a top 10 quarterback in the league, Nico Collins, a strong Texans defense, you needed to be able to compete at that elite level. And the Chargers didn't have the talent to do so. Now it's fine. They are still on schedule. This isn't a dig at the Chargers, but with Joey Bosa at 29 and a lot of work to do on this roster, if you hope to be competing for Lombardi trophies, this was a no-brainer move. This isn't to crap all over Joey Bosa. We're going to talk about where I think he could end up, and I think he could still be a contributor to a playoff and or Super Bowl run, depending on where he lands. But the Chargers, this makes a lot of sense. We just talked about where they might be going after DK Metcalf. I think they should be talking to any wide receiver that's not a slot guy. Unfortunately for them, Chris Godwin kind of is. But in the draft, could they take a Golden? Could they take a Luther Burden? Maybe. They have money to spend. Do they bring in a Milton Williams? Do they bring in a Josh Sweat? I think it's certainly possible. The Chargers are taking another step in the right direction here. And I'm really interested to see where they spend this money, and we'll talk about it when it happens. But for Joey Bosa, what's the contract going to look like for this guy at 29? Injury riddled, but again, when he plays, guy's a 5-time Pro Bowler. When he's out there, he has the talent of a high-end edge rusher, which, after watching the Super Bowl, you could argue is the second most important position in the game. What team is willing to pay? What team has the money to pay? New England. They have the most money. Could they spend that on Joey Bosa? I think it's certainly possible. New England, you guys will hear me talk about this all off season. They play their cards right. They're a playoff team. Drake May develops quicker than any of us think. They're competing with Buffalo for the division. I'm not predicting that second one. I am predicting that they will be a playoff team. And that said, it'll come with spending some of that $130 million that they have. Could be on Joey Bosa. The 49ers. How do we talk about Joey Bosa being released and being a free agent and not float out the idea that he could go and play with his brother Nick in San Francisco? That certainly is on the board of possibilities. The 49ers just cut money moving on from Deebo Samuel. There's rumors of them even trading Brandon Ayuk. Dre Greenlaw likely won't be back with the team. Money to be spent. And investing in the defensive line is not a bad option. And the Bosa brothers, when they're both out there, best of luck to opposing offensive lines, because those two guys would absolutely wreak havoc. I think it would be a little bit of a team-friendly deal, because at the end of the day, they cut the Deebo money so they could extend Brock Purdy, not so they could go sign Joey Bosa, but you have to at least entertain it. The Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons absolutely, unequivocally, 100% will be drafting with their high-end draft capital or spending the money on an edge rusher or two this offseason. They had one of the worst, if not the worst, pass rush in football last year. So to say that the Falcons won't have eyes on a Joey Bosa would be insane. Because again, if you get a healthy season out of him, the guy's a top 10 edge rusher, without a doubt. And again, it could be a Pro Bowler. And you look at that NFC South, it's for the taking. Tampa Bay has won it the last couple of years, but Atlanta was right there at the end with a rookie quarterback starting his second game. Another full year under the belt and a better defense, Atlanta could be walking into the NFC South and winning it, and they could win a lot of games, man. They could win a lot of games if they play their cards right. And lastly here, I got the Buffalo Bills. It's not a team that I think people are talking about, but if you are Buffalo and you just watched how the Eagles beat the Kansas City Chiefs, and you pretty much are assured at this point that your path goes through Kansas City to get to a Super Bowl, you have to do everything in your power to be able to set up a defensive line that you were confident enough can sustain pressure with four. Josh Allen is an offense in his own right, and you locked up Shakir, you have Kincaid on the rookie deal. You could figure out the weapons around Josh Allen. That's how good he is. But the defensive line has to be priority one for Buffalo. Josh Allen's locked up. Now you need that D-line. Because that is the equalizer when you were playing the Chiefs. That is the way to take on Kansas City and really, really have a shot at going to the Super Bowl. Because in this Josh Allen era, every year, the window's open. So if you can get Joey Bosa on a 1 to 2 year deal, do it. Because unless a Myles Garrett trade's coming, there isn't a better edge rusher on the market right now than Joey Bosa. And that's what a lot of teams are going to be thinking going in to this free agency. Another release that we have is wide receiver Davante Adams. The New York Jets have decided to part ways with Davante Adams, saving them $30 million in cap space. For the Jets, no-brainer decision here, right? We don't got to spend a lot of time on it. You're moving on from Rodgers. You're moving on from Davante Adams. You're moving on from guys from the old culture, getting as much, money as you can to build a culture under Aaron Glenn. Ultimately, the Jets aren't going to be ready to win a Super Bowl on Davante Adams' timeline. Makes a lot of sense. He is the instant best overall wide receiver in the free agency market. Instantly the best. Now he's 32 years old. So are we talking 1 year deals with high guarantees and high money for Davante Adams at this point? Can he still go and get a 2 to 3 year deal, but for a lower cost? That's probably up to Davante and his agent to figure out. But at the end of the day, this is a top 15 wide receiver in the NFL. Last year, 85 catches for 1,063 yards and 8 touchdowns in 14 games. Davante Adams is going to have a lot of suitors because, again, you're committing a short amount of time to him. At the end of the day, the max length of deal I could see would be 3 years, and it's very likely that the GM would negotiate that as a void year. But Davante Adams will be highly sought after by every single contending team. Now, I'm not going to go over every single contending team, but that means the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, the Texans, the Chargers, the Packers, the Lions, the Vikings, probably not the Eagles, the Commander. He'll be getting a call from all of these teams. He will have suitors. Not a shot in hell that a team that thinks that they're a Super Bowl contender doesn't give Adams' agent a call to see what the number is. Davante's going to have his pick of the litter. And here are some things that we could look at for what Davante Adams may want to do at this point in time. Will he follow Aaron Rodgers? He wanted to play with him on the Jets. Could he want to go to him on his next destination? Seems like that might be the Giants or the Raiders. I don't see him going back to the Raiders after how that ended. Does he want to go to the Giants, play alongside Malik Neighbors, stay in New York? Certainly possible. As well, a little bit of West Coast bias. Reports are saying that Davante Adams wants to live back on the West Coast. Chargers, Niners. Those are two teams that I take a look at. If the Niners are to move on from Brandon Ayuk, as some reports have suggested, Davante Adams is a really solid choice for them to bring in as a 1 to 2 year guy to play alongside Brock Purdy and keep this offense at a high level as they look to bounce back and head back into Super Bowl contention this year. That is a realistic move because you could probably get him for less than $30 million a year if you're willing to give him the 2 to 3 year deal. So you'd be saving money and, in my opinion, getting a better guy for your window. And it gives you a 2 to 3 year window to maybe draft some later end wide receivers, 3rd, 4th round talent, and see if you can get one to pop. Because Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall are fine, but if you go into next year moving Ayuk and not having another solid wide receiver, I question your weapons a little bit. You still have Kittle and McCaffrey, but how strong can McCaffrey be? For the Chargers, we talked about them earlier with DK Metcalf, but listen, the Chargers need an outside wide receiver. Now, Davante Adams is more of a Z. He could play anywhere on the field. You could put him in the slot. You could put him on the outside, and he'll be great. But this is a guy who end zone fades, at least with Rodgers, whereas his specialty. You get Adams with Herbert. Again, they move up real well. I think, again, the Texans are a team to look at here. The Houston Texans, what was their MO last offseason? Bring in Stephon Diggs on a 1-year deal. They have proven and shown that they don't mind giving veteran wide receivers short-term contracts to produce while CJ is still on the rookie deal. Those are the most likely teams, in my personal opinion. Now, again, Packers, it's possible, but if Davante Adams is looking to stay on this West Coast bias, I don't see where Green Bay, Wisconsin fits in there. But again, he probably has some form of love for his Packers. And again, they desperately need an alpha wide receiver 1. Desperately. That is something that is massively holding them back. And Davante Adams as a secure catch guy could make them feel great. But at the end of the day, Davante Adams could be taking your team over what is needed to be a Super Bowl contending team going into next year. And while we're on the topic of Super Bowl teams, let's talk about some of the moves that the Philadelphia Eagles made and just give my quick thoughts on those. They extend Saquon Barkley and reset the running back market, $20.6 million per year for Saquon Barkley. $20.6 million per year for a running back sounds like a lot. $20.6 million a year for an MVP candidate sounds like a steal. Saquon Barkley was an MVP candidate this year. And at the end of the day, the production he's giving you is equal to that of high-end wide receivers. And we have no problem shelling out $30+ million a year for these guys. So I think Saquon, bringing him back, 1, for production was an easy no-brainer, but 2, just what he means to the locker room, the leadership mentality. You know, this is a guy who will give you 2,000 rushing yards in a season and be in MVP conversations. But this is also a guy in his first game versus the Giants where he could set the rushing record. He's like, let Kenny Gainwell get some snaps. This is the same guy that in the NFC Championship, when Will Shipley scores a touchdown and Saquon's not even on the field, he's still the first one to celebrate with him. This is a guy that during the Super Bowl parade, he sees the ball boy on the other side of the fence and brings him to be a part of the team. All around good guy. Much respect, much love for Saquon Barkley. It's hard to imagine that there's better people in the NFL. And I think Saquon deserves every penny that he gets as well. The Eagles extended Zach Bond. Zach Bond was the big extension that I really thought Philly had to make to not necessarily keep their Super Bowl window open, but keep this core intact. Losing Darius Slay, cutting Bradbury, losing Milton Williams, Josh Sweat to free agency. Those are kind of things that I thought Philly was prepared to move on from with the depth at those positions, whether it's Quinyon, DeJean, Ringo, and on the D-line, you have Nolan Smith, Jalex Hunt, Jomo, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis are still there. So I thought that was fine. At linebacker, Nakobe Dean's likely to miss the beginning of the year with that injury that he suffered in the Packers game. And they just haven't been good at drafting and or developing this position in a long time. Zach Bond, all pro, gets a 4th highest annual salary. This was a no-brainer. Guy's great in pass coverage, great against the run. The centerpiece of the Eagles defense is Zach Bond. This is huge. Additional moves that I think that they could make. I think this is going to be a team now that people view as a destination to go if you were ring chasing. And they could bring in some veteran guys. I want them to extend Cam Jurgens at center, but ultimately, I think Howie's doing the right thing by bringing back and paying his guys. And the Eagles are showing that, hey, like this is a winning culture here, and we reward you if you're a great player. And all the other players are going to see that in the NFL. And could they go get a Christian Kirk to be a slot wide receiver on a short-term deal who was released? It may be. Does he want a ring, or is he satisfied with the money he got from Jacksonville previously? Those are the things that you got to look out for. But Philly making some really, really solid moves.